Welcome to my channel. Try to hear the latest story.
I'm Booker, 32, working as a software developer in Boston. Life's been good lately, except for the insane legal battle I just went through with my own parents. They actually sued me for buying myself a house with my own money. Why? Because they thought that house should go to my golden child sister Abigail instead. Trust me, you can't make this stuff up. What started as a proud milestone in my life spiraled into the ultimate family betrayal, but ended with me reclaiming my power in ways I never imagined. Before I dive into this crazy story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button while I explain how my own family dragged me to court over a house I bought with my own hard-earned money. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Chicago, I never quite felt like I belonged in my own family. Our house was nice enough with a small backyard where Dad would occasionally grill on weekends, but inside those walls was a different story. From as early as I can remember, there was Booker and there was Abigail, and they were worlds apart in our parents' eyes. Abigail came along when I was 4 years old. I still remember my dad, Robert, kneeling down to tell me I had a baby sister, his eyes shining with a pride I rarely saw directed at me. My mom, Patricia, seemed transformed overnight. Suddenly there were countless photos, cooing noises, and endless phone calls to relatives about how perfect their little girl was. At first, I thought things would even out as we both grew up. They didn't. By the time I was 7 and Abigail was 3, the pattern was firmly established in our household. My birthdays would feature practical gifts. Clothes for school, educational books, or once, memorably, a savings account that I wasn't allowed to touch. "For your future son," my dad would say, not unkindly but with none of the excitement that would come just weeks later at Abigail's celebration. Abigail's birthdays were spectacles. There would be expensive party venues, mountains of presents, and my parents beaming with joy as she unwrapped exactly what she wanted. When she turned 8, my parents surprised her with her own computer, ironically, the very thing they had denied me at that age despite my clear interest in technology. "Computers are for more than just playing games, Booker," my mom had lectured when I asked for one at 10 years old. "When you show more responsibility, maybe we can discuss it." Yet there was Abigail, giggling as she unwrapped her brand new laptop with no lecture about responsibility in sight. School achievements followed the same pattern. I still have a vivid memory of bringing home straight A's in 6th grade, including the highest score in my class for math. Mom glanced at the report card, said "good job," and went back to helping Abigail with her art project for school. That same semester, when Abigail brought home a B+ in reading, our parents took the entire family out for ice cream to celebrate her exceptional improvement. My interest in computers grew despite the lack of support. I would stay late at school to use the computer lab, teaching myself basic programming from books I checked out from the public library. When I tried showing my parents a simple game I had coded, my father sighed and said, "Don't waste so much time with this stuff. Focus on something practical." Meanwhile, they drove Abigail to dance classes 3 times a week and proudly displayed her recital photos on every flat surface of our living room. By 14, I had learned that self-reliance wasn't just a virtue, it was a necessity. I started mowing lawns in the neighborhood and saving every dollar. By 16, I had saved enough to buy my own used computer, which I kept in my room like a treasure. My parents barely noticed except to comment that I was becoming antisocial by spending so much time playing on that thing. The defining moment came when I was 17. After months of extra work with my computer science teacher, I had qualified for the state-level programming competition. It was scheduled for a Saturday in May, the same day as Abigail's spring dance recital. I didn't even bother asking my parents to come. I already knew the answer. What I didn't expect was my mother's reaction when I told her I would be taking the bus to the competition. "You're not going to your sister's recital?" she asked, genuinely shocked. "She's been practicing for months, Booker. She'll be so disappointed." "I've been working for months too, Mom," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. This is important to me. There will be other computer things, my father chimed in from behind his newspaper. Family comes first. I went to my competition alone, won first place, and came home to an empty house. My parents and Abigail were out celebrating her performance with dinner. My trophy sat on my desk unacknowledged, while Abigail's participation certificate joined the collection of her achievements on the living room wall. That night I made a promise to myself. I would work harder than anyone, save every penny, and build a future that no one could dismiss or take away from me. If my family wouldn't be my support system, I would create my own path forward. Looking back now, I realize that night was when I truly started to become the person I am today, not out of bitterness, but out of a determination to prove to myself that I was worthy of success, even if my family couldn't see it. When high school graduation rolled around, I already had a solid plan. Unlike many of my classmates who were receiving new cars and lavish graduation parties, I quietly accepted my diploma with only a brief congratulations from my parents, who were more preoccupied with taking photos of Abigail in her freshman cheerleading uniform at the ceremony. That summer, while my friends enjoyed their last carefree months before college, I worked 2 jobs, daytime shifts at a local electronics store and evenings waiting tables at a restaurant near campus. My goal was clear: save enough to cover my first year at community college without asking my parents for a dime. "You know, we're helping Abigail apply to Westfield University," my mother mentioned one night at dinner, referring to a prestigious private college that cost more per semester than I planned to spend on my entire education. "Their arts program is exceptional." "That's great," I replied, not mentioning that I had already enrolled in my own classes. When I finally told them about my college plans a week before classes started, my father frowned. "Community college. But your grades were good enough for state universities at least." "I'm paying for it myself," I explained. "This is what I can afford right now." There was an awkward silence before my mother said, "Well, that's very independent of you, Booker." What they didn't say, but what became abundantly clear the following year, was that they had been saving for Abigail's education all along. When she was accepted to Westfield with a partial scholarship, my parents proudly covered the remaining tuition, bought her a new laptop, furnished her dorm room, and gave her a monthly allowance that exceeded what I made working both my jobs. At community college, I threw myself into computer science courses, often staying in the lab until it closed at midnight. My hard work paid off when one of my professors recommended me for a competitive scholarship program that would cover 2 years at the state university to complete my degree. The day I received the acceptance letter was one of the proudest moments of my life. I called home immediately, hoping to share my excitement. My father answered, sounding distracted. "Dad, I got the transfer scholarship to state university. Full tuition for 2 years. "That's nice, son," he said, his voice distant. "Can I call you back? We're helping Abigail move into her sophomore housing. She got into that exclusive arts dorm she wanted." That call never came. At State University, I finally found my community. In my advanced programming class, I met Marcus, who would become not just my best friend but the closest thing to family support I had known. Marcus saw my potential without reservation and pushed me to excel in ways my family never had. "Dudes, you code like you were born speaking Java," he told me after we pulled an all-nighter for a project. "You're going places." While I was living in a cramped apartment with 3 roommates and working weekends at a tech repair shop to cover expenses, social media showed me glimpses of Abigail's college experience. Spring break trips to Florida, study abroad in Italy, and constant parental visits bringing care packages and taking her to expensive restaurants. During those rare occasions when I did visit home, usually during major holidays, conversations revolved around Abigail's college adventures and achievements. My parents knew every professor she had, every friend she made, every grade she received. When they asked about my life, it was perfunctory, surface-level questions that barely scratched my daily existence. "So how are your computer classes?" my mother would ask, as though I was taking a casual hobby course rather than pursuing a demanding degree. Despite the lack of family support, or perhaps because of it, I graduated with honors. My name was called during the ceremony, and as I walked across the stage to accept my diploma, I scanned the audience briefly, knowing I wouldn't see my parents there. They had sent a text that morning. "Sorry we can't make it today. Abigail has a gallery opening for her photography class." Good luck. Marcus and his parents cheered loudly enough for everyone, and afterward took me out to celebrate. Armed with my degree and determination, I landed my first job at Tech Future, a promising startup in Boston developing innovative database solutions. The starting salary wasn't impressive, but it was enough to rent a small studio apartment and begin building my professional life far from Chicago. Those early years in Boston were transformative. I worked endless hours, volunteered for every challenging project, and quickly gained a reputation as a problem solver who could handle the most complex coding issues. Within 18 months, I had received 2 promotions and nearly doubled my salary. As I climbed the professional ladder, I watched from afar as Abigail graduated and moved back home, struggling to find direction with her arts degree. My parents supported her through what they called her creative exploration phase, which seemed to consist mainly of part-time jobs that she quit after a few months and various artistic hobbies they funded. During one Christmas visit home when I was 28 and establishing myself as a senior developer, the contrast between our lives couldn't have been more stark. I arrived with gifts I had carefully selected and paid for myself, including a high-end coffee machine for the house. Abigail, still living at home, gave everyone hand-painted picture frames she had made in her latest crafting workshop. At dinner, my mother spent 20 minutes gushing about how Abigail had recently been hired as a marketing assistant at a local company. "It's entry-level, but her boss already loves her," my mother beamed. "They're giving her real responsibility already." When the conversation finally turned to me, my father asked casually, "Still at that computer place?" as though I hadn't been sharing updates about my career progression for years. "Actually, I just led the development of our company's new security platform," I said. "We landed 3 major clients because of it, and I received a substantial bonus." "That's nice," my mother replied before turning to Abigail. "Honey, tell Booker about your workspace at the office. Didn't you say they gave you your own desk with a window view?" As I flew back to Boston after that visit, I realized something important. I had stopped seeking their approval years ago, but some small part of me had still hoped they would eventually recognize my achievements. It was time to let that hope go and focus entirely on building the life I wanted for myself. By the time I turned 30, I had established myself as one of the top developers in my company. I had been promoted to lead architect, overseeing a team of 12 other programmers and designing systems used by Fortune 500 companies. My financial situation was stable, with a healthy emergency fund and retirement savings growing steadily. For 5 years, I had been putting aside money specifically for a down payment on a house. Real estate in Boston was expensive, but I had been methodical in my savings plan, setting aside bonuses and living below my means. My apartment was still modest, my car reliable but not flashy, and my splurges limited to occasionally upgrading my home computer setup and taking Marcus on a yearly fishing trip. The housing search began as a casual weekend activity, just browsing neighborhoods and getting a feel for the market. Then one Sunday afternoon, my realtor Jessica called with excitement in her voice. "Booker, I found something that's absolutely perfect for you. It just hit the market and it won't last long." The house was a Victorian 3-bedroom in Somerville, a neighborly area just outside downtown Boston. Built in 1910, it had strong bones but needed cosmetic updates, exactly the kind of project I had been hoping for. The backyard was small but private, with an old maple tree providing shade. The previous owners had maintained the original hardwood floors and crown molding, preserving the character while updating the electrical and plumbing systems. Walking through the empty rooms, I could already envision my future there. A home office in the smaller bedroom, friends gathered around a dining table I would build myself, maybe even a family of my own someday. At $580,000, it was at the top of my budget, but with my savings and careful planning, I could make it work. I want to put in an offer, I told Jessica that same day, a surge of excitement making my voice shake slightly. This is the one. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, inspections, and negotiations. When the seller accepted my offer, I felt a deep satisfaction unlike anything I had experienced in my professional achievements. This house represented not just financial success, but the life I had built for myself against all odds. The day I signed the final papers and received the keys, I sat alone on the floor of what would be my living room, overwhelmed with emotion. This was mine. Every square foot represented years of hard work, determination, and self-reliance. No one had helped me get here, which made the achievement all the sweeter. In my moment of triumph, I made what would turn out to be a critical mistake. I decided to share the news with my family. I called my parents that evening, genuinely excited to tell them about this milestone. The phone rang several times before my mother answered. "Hello. Mom, it's Booker. I have some big news to share." "Oh, Booker. We were just talking about you. Abigail is here for dinner. Do you want me to put you on speaker?" Before I could answer, I heard the shuffle of the phone and then my father's voice joining the conversation. "What's going on, son?" Taking a deep breath, I shared my news. "I bought a house today. Just finished signing all the papers. It's a beautiful Victorian in Somerville that I'm going to renovate." The silence that followed was not what I had expected. There were no congratulations, no questions about the property, just a strange, tense pause. Finally, my mother spoke. "A house? In Boston? Why would you waste money on that?" "It's not a waste, Mom. It's an investment, and it's something I've been working toward for years." "But Boston is so expensive," my father chimed in. "Wouldn't it make more sense to buy something back here in Chicago? You know, eventually you'll want to move back closer to family." I had never once mentioned wanting to return to Chicago. In fact, I had made it clear over the years that I had built my life in Boston and was happy there. Before I could respond, my mother continued. "You know, your sister has been talking about wanting to buy a house too." There it was, the immediate pivot to Abigail. I should have expected it, but somehow it still stung. "That's great," I said neutrally. "I'm sure she'll find something when she's ready." "It's so hard for her to save," my mother continued. "The arts marketing field just doesn't pay what it should, and with her student loans from Westfield." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear. I changed the subject, asked about their garden, and ended the call as quickly as I could without being rude. The excitement of my purchase had dimmed, replaced by a familiar disappointment. 2 weeks later, as I was painting what would become my home office, my phone rang. It was my father. "Your mother and I have been thinking," he began without preamble, "about your house situation." "What about it?" I asked, setting down my paint roller. "Well, we've been talking with Abigail. She's really struggling to get ahead financially. Have you considered that maybe, since you're doing so well, you could help your sister get started with her own place?" I was stunned by the directness of the question. "Dad, I just bought this house. I have a 30-year mortgage." "But you make good money," he pressed. "And this is your sister we're talking about. Family helps family." The conversation ended with tension on both sides, but I assumed it would blow over. I was wrong. The following weekend, my parents announced they were coming to Boston to see my new house. I was surprised but cautiously optimistic that perhaps they were making an effort to show interest in my life. I spent days cleaning and preparing the still half-empty house for their visit. They arrived with Abigail in tow, a detail they had conveniently failed to mention beforehand. As I gave them a tour of the house, pointing out my plans for renovations and the original architectural details I loved, their responses were tepid at best. "It's quaint," my mother said, running a finger along a windowsill as though checking for dust. "Seems like a lot of work," my father added, frowning at the bathroom I planned to remodel. At dinner that evening in the local restaurant I had chosen to celebrate their visit, the true purpose of their trip became clear. "Booker," my father said after ordering his meal, "we've given this a lot of thought. The responsible thing would be for you to sell this house. I nearly choked on my water. Excuse me. You're single, you don't need all this space, my mother continued as if they had rehearsed. Abigail is thinking about starting a family soon, and she needs to get established. Abigail nodded solemnly. Jackson and I want to get married next year, but we can't afford a wedding and a house. Jackson was her boyfriend of 5 months, whom I had never met and had only heard mentioned in passing. What exactly are you asking me to do? I said carefully, though I already knew the answer. My father leaned forward. Sell the house, give the proceeds to Abigail for a down payment in Chicago. You can always buy another place later when you really need it. The audacity was breathtaking. I had spent years saving, planning, and working toward this goal, only to be told I should give it all up for my sister's benefit. What was most shocking was the entitlement in their request, the absolute conviction that this was a reasonable thing to ask. That's not going to happen, I said firmly. This is my house, bought with my money, and I'm keeping it. My mother's face hardened. You've always been the successful one, Booker. Don't you think you owe something to your sister who hasn't had the same opportunities? What opportunities hasn't she had? I asked incredulously. You paid for her private university education, supported her through years of finding herself, and from what I can see, continue to subsidize her lifestyle. Meanwhile, I put myself through college, built my career from nothing, and saved for 5 years to afford this house. That's because you didn't need our help, my father said, as though it was a criticism rather than a compliment. The argument escalated from there. Voices were raised, tears were shed, mainly by Abigail and my mother, and by the end of the evening, we were no longer speaking. They checked out of their hotel the next morning and flew back to Chicago without saying goodbye. I hoped that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The weeks following my family's disastrous visit were filled with escalating pressure. It began with daily phone calls from my mother, alternating between guilt trips and angry accusations. We sacrificed everything for you growing up, she would say, conveniently forgetting the years of emotional neglect and the financial support that had gone exclusively to Abigail. This is how you repay us. When I stopped answering her calls, the text messages started. My father took a different approach, sending long emails detailing all the ways my selfishness was hurting the family. One particularly memorable message included a detailed calculation of how much they had supposedly spent on my upbringing, including the cost of the hospital delivery when I was born, presented as though it was a debt I needed to repay. I began saving these communications, something that would prove crucial later, though at the time it was simply a way to process the absurdity of the situation. I shared some of the messages with Marcus, who was as baffled as I was. Dude, this is next level crazy, he said after reading one particularly aggressive email. They're acting like you stole the house from your sister, not bought it with your own money. 3 weeks after their visit, Abigail joined the campaign. Her initial messages were manipulative attempts to appeal to my emotions. I always looked up to you, Booker, she wrote. I thought you'd be happy to help me start my life. Jackson and I were counting on you. When that didn't work, her true feelings emerged. You've always had everything handed to you. You owe the family after all we've done for you. This statement was so divorced from reality that I almost laughed. Almost. The sheer conviction with which she believed this fantasy was disturbing. In her mind, and clearly in my parents' as well, my success had nothing to do with my own efforts and everything to do with some imaginary advantage I had been given. The harassment intensified when my parents somehow got my work email and began sending messages there. I had to explain the situation to my manager when one particularly aggressive email from my father was accidentally copied to my entire team. Then came the surprise visits, my mother showing up unannounced at my office, claiming she happened to be in Boston and wanted to talk things through. Security eventually had to escort her from the building when she refused to leave, creating a scene that became the subject of office gossip for weeks. The situation reached a new level of absurdity when my parents called a family meeting with extended relatives, presenting their version of events to aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. I learned about this when my Aunt Diana called me, concerned about what she'd been told. Your parents said you promised to buy Abigail a house and then went back on your word, she explained. They said you manipulated family money somehow. It didn't sound right to me. Family money, I repeated, genuinely confused. There is no family money. I bought the house with my salary that I earned myself. As I spoke with more relatives, a disturbing picture emerged. My parents had been systematically spreading misinformation, casting me as the villain who had somehow cheated Abigail out of a house that was rightfully hers. Some relatives believed them. Others were skeptical but unsure what to think. 6 weeks after their visit, during a particularly heated phone call, my father made a threat that I initially dismissed as bluster. If you won't be reasonable about this, Booker, we might have to take other measures to make sure Abigail gets what she deserves. What does that mean exactly? I asked, tired of the vague accusations and emotional manipulation. It means that we're consulting with attorneys, he said coldly. You made verbal commitments to this family that you're now breaking. That has legal consequences. I laughed out loud. I never promised anyone a house. That's completely fabricated. No lawyer would touch this case. We'll see about that, he replied before hanging up. I mentioned the threat to Marcus during our weekly basketball game, treating it as another absurd chapter in the ongoing family drama. They're bluffing, I said as we took a water break. They have to know how ridiculous this sounds. Marcus wasn't so sure. People get weird about money and family, man. Just be careful. Maybe talk to a lawyer yourself, just in case. I brushed off his concern. The idea of my parents actually suing me seemed too outlandish to take seriously. I focused instead on my house renovations, throwing myself into tiling the kitchen backsplash and refinishing the hardwood floors in the living room. The physical labor was therapeutic, helping me process the emotional turmoil of the past weeks. Then came the day that changed everything. I was in a meeting with clients when my team lead stepped in, looking uncomfortable. Sorry to interrupt, she said, but there's someone in reception insisting on seeing you. He says it's a legal matter. Confused and embarrassed, I excused myself and went to the lobby. A stern-looking man in a suit introduced himself as a process server and handed me a thick envelope. You've been served with a lawsuit, he said matter-of-factly. Please acknowledge receipt. In a daze, I signed the form he presented and watched him walk away. Standing alone in the reception area of my workplace, I opened the envelope with trembling hands. The document inside was surreal. Robert and Patricia Thompson versus Booker Thompson, complaint for breach of verbal contract and unjust enrichment. According to the complaint, I had verbally agreed to purchase a home for my sister during family discussions spanning several years. My parents were claiming that my purchase of the Somerville house constituted a breach of this supposed agreement and that I had unjustly enriched myself with funds that were intended for Abigail's benefit. The complaint further alleged that my financial success was directly attributable to extraordinary family support and sacrifice that created an implicit contract obligating me to provide financial assistance to my sister. It was as though they had created an alternate reality where they had been supportive parents who had funded my education and career, and I was an ungrateful son refusing to fulfill my obligations. Every claim in the document was a complete inversion of the truth. As I stood there, lawsuit in hand, the full weight of what was happening hit me. My own parents were not just trying to pressure or manipulate me anymore. They were using the legal system as a weapon to try to take my house, the physical manifestation of everything I had worked for, and give it to my sister. The humiliation of being served at work, the shock of seeing the fabricated claims in black and white, and the devastating realization that my parents would go this far all combined in a moment of perfect clarity. This was war, and I would not lose. The immediate aftermath of being served with the lawsuit was a blur of confusion and anxiety. I left work early that day, the legal papers feeling like a physical weight in my bag. Back at my half-renovated house, I spread the documents across my kitchen counter, trying to make sense of what I was reading. The claims were so outlandish, so completely divorced from reality, that part of me still believed this was an elaborate intimidation tactic rather than a genuine legal action. Surely no court would entertain such obviously fabricated allegations. My first call was to Marcus, who responded exactly as a best friend should, with immediate outrage and practical support. "This is insane," he said after I explained the situation. "But don't panic. My cousin Sarah is a lawyer. Not family law specifically, but she'll know what to do next. I'm calling her right now." Sarah agreed to meet me the following morning. She was a sharply dressed woman in her early 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor that I found instantly reassuring. After reviewing the complaint, she looked up at me with a mixture of professional interest and personal disbelief. "In 15 years of practice, I've seen some questionable lawsuits, but this," she shook her head. "To be clear, there was never any agreement that you would buy a house for your sister. No promises made even casually." "Absolutely not," I confirmed. The first I heard about this expectation was after I had already purchased my house. Sarah took detailed notes as I recounted my relationship with my parents, Abigail's favored status, and the escalating harassment following my house purchase. When I mentioned the saved emails and text messages, she leaned forward with increased interest. "Those communications will be crucial evidence," she said, "especially if they demonstrate that this agreement was never mentioned until after you bought your house." By the end of our meeting, Sarah had agreed to represent me and outlined our strategy. While she normally handled corporate litigation, she explained that this case touched on contract law, her area of expertise. The fact that my parents were claiming a verbal contract existed made this her territory. "Here's what's going to happen," she explained. "We'll file a motion to dismiss based on the statute of frauds, which requires certain types of contracts to be in writing. Agreements involving real estate fall under this statute. But even if the judge doesn't dismiss outright, they have virtually no evidence to support their claims." The confidence in her voice helped calm my frayed nerves, but the reality of the situation still felt overwhelming. I was facing a legal battle against my own family, based on claims that were entirely fictional. "What about my work?" I asked. "This is already affecting my performance, and now I'll need to take time off for court appearances." "Talk to your manager," Sarah advised. "Be transparent about the situation. This isn't your fault, and most employers will be understanding." She was right. When I explained the situation to my manager the next day, his response was supportive. "Family legal issues happen," he said. "Take the time you need, and we can adjust your project deadlines." What I didn't anticipate was the emotional and financial toll the lawsuit would take over the coming months. Legal proceedings moved slowly, and each step of the process brought new stresses. The initial filing of our response to the complaint, the scheduling of depositions, the endless back and forth of legal documents that required my attention and approval. My parents had hired Gerald Roth, an attorney known for aggressive tactics in family disputes. His reputation was built on high-conflict divorce cases, and he approached our case with the same scorched-earth strategy. Every interaction with him or his office left me feeling drained and angry. The discovery phase revealed just how calculated my parents' actions had been. They had consulted with Roth months before my house purchase, apparently anticipating that I might need legal persuasion to fulfill my family obligations. Emails between them discussed strategies for pressuring me into giving Abigail financial support, with my father writing ominously that Booker needs to learn that success comes with responsibility to family. Most disturbing was an email from my mother to Roth, sent just days after my house closing, stating, "As we discussed, Booker has never directly refused to help his sister with a house. He's always been vague when we've brought it up, which we believe constitutes an implicit agreement." The blatant manipulation and planning revealed in these communications was shocking even to Sarah, who had initially maintained some professional detachment from the emotional aspects of the case. "They were setting you up," she said bluntly as we reviewed the discovery documents. "They interpreted your silence or changing the subject as agreement, then documented this interpretation to build their case. The financial cost of defending myself was substantial. Even with Sarah giving me a reduced rate as Marcus's cousin, legal fees quickly mounted into the tens of thousands of dollars. The house renovations I had been so excited about were put on indefinite hold as I diverted funds to my legal defense. 3 months into the process, we attempted mediation at the court's recommendation. I sat across a conference table from my parents and Abigail with our respective attorneys beside us. It was the first time we had been in the same room since their visit to my house. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. My father stared at me with cold anger. Abigail looked simultaneously smug and tearful, the perfect picture of a wronged sister. I felt nothing but a hollow sadness at what our relationship had become, or perhaps what it had always been, now stripped of any pretense. The mediation went nowhere. My parents' initial compromise offer was that I would sell my house, give 70% of the proceeds to Abigail, and keep 30% for myself. When I refused, they accused me of being unreasonable and unwilling to negotiate in good faith. "There's nothing to negotiate," I said finally. "I bought a house with my own money. There was never any agreement, implicit or explicit, that I would buy Abigail a house. I'm not giving her my house or the money from selling it." As the legal proceedings dragged on, the stress began affecting every aspect of my life. I had trouble sleeping, lost weight, and found it increasingly difficult to concentrate at work. Projects that would normally take me days now stretched into weeks as my mind constantly circled back to the lawsuit and the betrayal behind it. One night, as I sat at my kitchen table reviewing yet another set of legal documents, my phone rang. It was Abigail. Booker, her voice was soft with a trembling quality that instantly put me on alert. I think we need to talk. My lawyer advised me not to have direct conversations about the case," I replied cautiously. "It's not about the case." "Well, not directly. I miss my brother. Can't we work this out as a family?" For a brief, painful moment, I wanted to believe her. Despite everything, some part of me still longed for the family connection I had never truly had. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. "If you would just help me with a down payment, not even the whole house, just enough to get started, I know Mom and Dad would drop the lawsuit. We could be a family again." And there it was. Not an apology, not an admission that their claims were fabricated, but another attempt at manipulation, this time using the emotional toll of the lawsuit as leverage. "Abigail," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded, "we are not and have never been the kind of family you're describing. I'm not giving you money for a down payment. I'll see you in court." I hung up and immediately called Sarah to report the conversation, which she noted could potentially be considered an improper settlement approach outside formal channels. More importantly, it strengthened our case by demonstrating that even Abigail knew their legal claims were weak. As the court date approached, the pressure intensified. My parents began reaching out to mutual connections, former classmates, even my college professors, seeking anyone who might remember me mentioning plans to help my sister financially. These efforts yielded nothing, but the invasion into my personal and professional networks was another layer of stress. Through it all, Marcus remained my strongest support, showing up with takeout food on nights when I was too exhausted to cook, helping with basic house maintenance I no longer had time for, and providing a necessary outlet for the anger and hurt I was careful not to bring into the courtroom. "They're not going to win this," he reminded me repeatedly. "The truth is on your side." As I prepared my testimony with Sarah, reviewing the timeline of events and the evidence we had gathered, I realized that regardless of the legal outcome, something irreparable had broken in my family relationship. Even if we somehow reconciled in the future, I would never again trust my parents or sister. That loss, more than the financial strain or professional disruption, was the true cost of this lawsuit. The night before the court date, I stood in the half-finished living room of my house, the house that had become both the symbol of my independence and the battleground for this family war. Whatever happened the next day, I promised myself I would not let them take this from me. Not the physical house itself, and not what it represented. My hard-won success and the life I had built on my own terms. The morning of the court date arrived with a strange sense of calm. After months of anxiety and preparation, there was an odd relief in finally facing the moment of truth. I dressed in my best suit, the one I reserved for client presentations, and met Sarah at the courthouse steps 30 minutes before our scheduled appearance. "Ready?" she asked, her briefcase filled with the evidence we had meticulously prepared. "As I'll ever be," I replied. Inside the courtroom, the formal setting made the absurdity of the situation even more apparent. This wasn't a family disagreement around a dinner table. It was a legal proceeding with a judge, court reporter, and the full weight of the judicial system. My parents and Abigail sat at the plaintiff's table with Gerald Roth, all three dressed impeccably and wearing expressions of solemn righteousness. My mother had chosen a conservative navy dress that made her look like a politician's wife, while my father's gray suit and red tie projected authority. Abigail wore a modest floral dress that somehow made her appear younger and more vulnerable than her 28 years. It was a carefully crafted image of a respectable family wronged by an ungrateful son. Judge Eleanor Peterson, a woman in her 60s with shrewd eyes behind rimless glasses, called the court to order. After preliminary introductions, Roth presented the opening statement for my parents' case. "Your Honor, this is a case about family obligations and broken promises," he began. Robert and Patricia Thompson supported their son Booker throughout his education and early career, making sacrifices that allowed him to achieve financial success. In return, Booker Thompson repeatedly assured his parents that he would help provide for his sister's future, specifically by assisting with her housing needs. He went on to paint a picture so distorted from reality that it was almost fascinating in its creativity. According to Roth, my parents had invested heavily in my education, false, provided ongoing financial support during my early career, absolutely false, and received numerous assurances from me that I would give back to the family by helping Abigail buy a house, entirely fabricated. When Mr. Thompson purchased an expensive home for himself, using funds that the family understood would be directed toward his sister's housing needs, he violated both a verbal contract and the implicit understanding that had guided family financial decisions for years, Roth concluded. When Sarah rose for our opening statement, her approach was refreshingly straightforward. "Your Honor, this case is indeed about family, but not in the way the plaintiffs suggest," she began. "This is about parents who, having favored one child throughout his life, now seek to claim the fruits of his independent success for their preferred child. There was never any agreement, verbal or implied, that Booker Thompson would purchase a home for his sister. Mr. Thompson put himself through college without parental support, built his career through his own efforts, and purchased his home with money he earned and saved over 5 years." She outlined the complete absence of evidence for any agreement and emphasized the statute of frauds, which requires real estate agreements to be in writing. "What we have instead, Your Honor, is documentary evidence that this alleged agreement was invented after Mr. Thompson purchased his home as part of a coordinated campaign of harassment and manipulation." The testimony phase began with my father taking the stand. Under Roth's questioning, he presented a revisionist history of my childhood and early adulthood that bore little resemblance to my actual experience. "We always supported both our children equally," he claimed. "But Booker was more academically gifted, so he received scholarships that Abigail didn't qualify for. We agreed as a family that we would direct more resources to Abigail's education since Booker had these other opportunities. This was a complete fabrication. I had received one scholarship to transfer to the state university, long after my parents had already fully funded Abigail's education at a much more expensive private institution." "Did Booker ever explicitly agree to help his sister purchase a home?" Roth asked. My father's answer was carefully worded. "Whenever we discussed family financial planning, Booker acknowledged that his success came with responsibility to help his sister. He never objected to our expectation that he would assist with her housing needs." When Sarah cross-examined my father, she methodically dismantled his narrative by focusing on specifics rather than generalities. "Mr. Thompson, did you pay for Booker's tuition at community college?" "Well, he didn't ask us to," my father hedged. "That wasn't my question. Did you pay for his tuition, yes or no? No, but did you pay for his textbooks or housing during his community college years? No. Did you contribute financially to his education after he transferred to the state university? He had a scholarship. Again, that's not responsive to my question. Did you contribute any money toward his education at the state university? No. Sarah continued this approach, establishing through my father's own admissions that my parents had provided no financial support for my education, housing, or career development. She then turned to the alleged agreement. Mr. Thompson, can you tell the court the specific date and location when Booker explicitly agreed to purchase a house for his sister? My father shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't a single conversation. It was an understanding developed over many family discussions. Can you recall even one specific instance when Booker stated he would buy a house for Abigail? Just one date and location. It was implied in our conversations about family responsibility. So that's a no. You cannot recall a single specific instance. It was understood, my father insisted, his face reddening. My mother's testimony followed a similar pattern, with vague claims about family understandings but no specific instances of any agreement. When presented with her own emails discussing strategies to pressure me into helping Abigail, emails that clearly indicated there had been no prior agreement, she became defensive and evasive. Abigail took the stand next, and her performance was the most troubling to watch. She spoke tearfully about how she had always believed her brother would help her establish a home, how she and her boyfriend had planned their future based on this expectation, and how devastated she was by my betrayal. Booker promised me, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Maybe not in those exact words, but he knew how much I wanted a house, and he always said he would take care of me when he made it big. Sarah's cross-examination was gentle but precise, asking Abigail to recall any specific conversation where I had made such a promise. Like my parents, she could only offer generalities and impressions, not concrete instances. When it was my turn to testify, I felt a strange sense of calm. After months of having my reality denied and distorted, I finally had the opportunity to tell the truth under oath. I described my childhood as the less favored child, my self-funded education, and my independent career development. I detailed the conversation when my parents first suggested I should give up my house for Abigail, which happened after I had already purchased the property, contradicting their claim of a pre-existing agreement. At no point did I ever agree, suggest, or imply that I would buy a house for my sister, I stated clearly. The first time this expectation was communicated to me was after I had already purchased my own home, when my parents visited and demanded that I sell it and give the money to Abigail. The turning point in the case came when Sarah presented my financial records as evidence. Bank statements showing my steady savings over 5 years for the house down payment. Student loan documents demonstrating that I had financed my own education. Tax returns reflecting my gradual income growth through promotions I had earned. But the most devastating evidence was the collection of emails, text messages, and documented communications from my family during the months following my house purchase. These messages, presented in chronological order, told a clear story. The idea that I should buy Abigail a house emerged only after I had purchased my own home, and the alleged agreement was a retroactive invention designed to pressure me into giving up my property. Particularly damning was an email my father had sent to my mother just 2 weeks after I announced my house purchase, which Sarah projected on a screen for the court to see. Booker finally made something of himself, now it's time he pays back the family. If we present it as something he always knew was expected, he'll have a harder time refusing. There were audible murmurs in the courtroom when this email was displayed. Judge Peterson's expression remained neutral, but she leaned forward slightly, studying the document with increased attention. During cross-examination, Roth tried to suggest that my success was attributable to advantages and support my parents had provided. This backfired spectacularly when, under his questioning, I was able to detail specific instances where my achievements had been dismissed or minimized by my family. Did your parents attend your college graduation? Roth asked, apparently believing they had. No, they did not, I replied. They attended my sister's photography exhibition instead. Did they help you move to Boston for your first job? No. My friend Marcus and his parents helped me move. Surely they celebrated when you received your first promotion. When I called to tell them about my promotion, my mother changed the subject to my sister's new apartment decoration project. As the testimony phase concluded, Judge Peterson began asking her own questions, primarily directed at my parents. Her tone grew increasingly skeptical as she probed the inconsistencies in their claims. Mrs. Thompson, she asked my mother, you testified that you supported both your children equally. Did you pay for your daughter's college education? Yes, Your Honor. Westfield University. And did you pay for your son's education as well? As my husband explained, Booker had scholarships. That doesn't answer my question, the judge interrupted. Did you financially contribute to your son's education in the same way you contributed to your daughter's? After a long pause, my mother admitted, no, we did not. Mr. Thompson, the judge turned to my father, in your complaint, you claim your son agreed to purchase a house for his sister in return for extraordinary family support. What specific support did you provide to your son during his education and early career? My father stammered through a vague answer about emotional support and family connections, but could not identify any tangible assistance they had provided. After both sides presented closing arguments, Judge Peterson announced she would take a 30-minute recess before delivering her ruling. Those 30 minutes felt like the longest of my life, despite Sarah's confidence that the case would be decided in our favor. When the judge returned, her expression was stern as she delivered her ruling. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony presented in this matter, I find in favor of the defendant, Booker Thompson, she began. The plaintiffs have failed to establish the existence of any contract, verbal or implied, regarding the purchase of property for Abigail Thompson. Moreover, the evidence suggests that this claim was manufactured after the defendant purchased his own home, as part of a coordinated effort to pressure him into relinquishing his property. She continued, her voice taking on an edge of disapproval. This court is disturbed by the apparent pattern of familial favoritism and the subsequent attempt to use the legal system as a tool of coercion. The plaintiff's claims border on abuse of process, and I am ordering them to pay all reasonable legal fees incurred by the defendant in this matter. Judge Peterson looked directly at my parents. The court cannot adjudicate matters of fairness in familial affection or parental treatment of children. However, it can and will protect individuals from unsubstantiated claims designed to deprive them of legally obtained property. This case is dismissed with prejudice. The finality of those words, dismissed with prejudice, sent a wave of relief through me so profound that for a moment I couldn't move. It was over. I had won. As we left the courtroom, my parents and Abigail walked past without looking at me, their faces rigid with anger and humiliation. There were no words exchanged, no acknowledgement of the relationship that had been irrevocably damaged by their actions. Just silence and the sound of their footsteps walking away. Outside on the courthouse steps, I thanked Sarah for her brilliant representation. You had the truth on your side, she replied simply. That made my job easier. As I watched my family drive away from the courthouse, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction in their defeat. Only a profound sense of loss for the family I had never truly had, and now never would. The weeks following the court victory were strangely anticlimactic. I had expected to feel elated, vindicated, or at least relieved. Instead, I found myself moving through my days with a hollow sensation, as though I had won the battle but suffered injuries that would take far longer to heal than the legal conflict itself. My house, once a symbol of achievement, now carried complicated emotions. Each room held echoes of the fight to keep it, the accusations hurled by my family, the painful revelations of how little they valued me. I would sometimes stand in the half-renovated kitchen, hands pressed against the countertop, wondering if the victory had been worth the cost. But slowly, deliberately, I began the process of reclaiming both my home and my sense of self. The first step was establishing firm boundaries. Through Sarah, I sent a formal cease and desist letter to my parents and Abigail, making it clear that any further contact should go through legal channels. I blocked their numbers, email addresses, and social media accounts. It was a painful decision, but a necessary one. The court case had made it abundantly clear that they viewed me primarily as a resource to be exploited, not a son or brother to be loved. To my surprise, the legal victory resulted in unexpected support from extended family. My Aunt Diana, who had initially called about my parents' allegations, reached out again. "I saw the court documents," she said when I cautiously answered her call. "What they did to you was unconscionable, Booker. I want you to know that not everyone in the family agrees with how you've been treated." That conversation led to others with cousins, uncles, and family friends who had witnessed the dynamic between me and my sister growing up, but had never fully understood its extent. Many expressed regret for not recognizing or challenging the disparity in how we were treated. These reconnections, though sometimes awkward, helped heal some of the isolation I had felt for most of my life. With the legal threat removed and a modest payment for legal fees coming from my parents, collected through a court-enforced judgment when they initially refused to pay, I turned my attention back to the house itself. What had been a source of contention would become a source of healing. The renovation projects I had put on hold now resumed with renewed purpose. Each improvement became an act of reclamation. I tore out the dated kitchen cabinets and installed new ones, choosing warm cherry wood that transformed the space. The upstairs bathroom, once cramped and dysfunctional, became a modern retreat with a rainfall shower and heated floors. Marcus was my constant ally through this period, showing up weekends with tools, supplies, and his unwavering support. Other friends joined in as well, co-workers who had witnessed the stress of the lawsuit, neighbors who had heard parts of the story and wanted to help, new acquaintances who simply enjoyed home improvement projects. "Let's tear out this wall next," Marcus suggested one Saturday, pointing to the division between the dining room and living room. "Open concept, man. It'll transform the whole downstairs." He was right. When the wall came down with proper structural supports installed, light flowed through the space in a way that made the house feel more welcoming, more open, a physical manifestation of the emotional walls I was trying to dismantle in my own life. 3 months after the court case, my team lead at work pulled me aside after a meeting. "You're back," she said simply. "Your code, your contributions in meetings, you're present again in a way you haven't been since that lawsuit started. It's good to see." She was right. The fog of stress and anxiety had finally begun to lift, allowing me to reconnect with the work I loved and the colleagues I respected. Projects that had seemed overwhelming during the legal battle now became engaging challenges again. I found myself staying late at the office not from obligation but from genuine interest in solving complex problems. 6 months after the court case, I received a small envelope in the mail with my Aunt Diana's return address. Inside was a faded photograph I had never seen before, me at about 5 years old, sitting on my grandfather's lap at what appeared to be a family picnic. I was beaming at the camera, looking completely happy and secure. Diana's note read simply, "Found this while cleaning out Dad's things. You were always loved, Booker, even if not by those who should have loved you most. Never forget that." That photograph became the first personal item I displayed in my newly renovated living room. Not as a reminder of what I had lost, but as evidence that connection and belonging had existed for me, however briefly, and could exist again. As summer turned to fall, I made a decision that surprised even me. I would host a housewarming party. Not the kind of event I would have considered before, when I kept most people at a safe emotional distance. This would be a genuine opening of my home and my life to the people who had stood by me. The guest list included Marcus and his family, co-workers who had covered for me during court appearances, neighbors who had checked in during the renovation chaos, Sarah and her partner, and even a few extended family members like Diana who had reached out after the lawsuit. The night of the party, as my home filled with conversation and laughter, I found myself standing in a corner of the living room, watching the scene with a sense of wonder. These people had chosen to be here, chosen to support me, chosen to celebrate this milestone. There was no obligation, no manipulation, no hidden agenda, just genuine connection. Quite a transformation, Sarah commented, joining me with a glass of wine. The house and you. I'm still working on both, I admitted. That's how it should be, she replied. The best renovations are never really finished. Around this time, I also made another significant decision. I established a small scholarship fund at my community college alma mater. The Booker Thompson Self-Reliance Scholarship would provide financial assistance to students who, like me, were putting themselves through school without family support. It wasn't a large endowment, but it was enough to help one student each year with books and supplies. When the college asked if I wanted to issue a press release about the donation, I declined. This wasn't about public recognition or spite toward my family. It was about transforming my experience into something constructive, creating the support system for others that I had lacked myself. Nearly a year after the court case, I received occasional updates about my parents and Abigail through mutual connections. They had apparently spun a narrative in which I was the villain who had used legal technicalities to deny my sister her rightful support. Some believed them. Most saw through the facade, especially after the details of the court case became known. Abigail had eventually moved in with her boyfriend Jackson in an apartment subsidized by my parents. According to Diana, they still talked about what Booker owed the family, seemingly unable to let go of their sense of entitlement even after the decisive court ruling. I felt nothing but a distant sadness at these reports. The anger had faded, replaced by a kind of peaceful acceptance that some relationships cannot and should not be salvaged. The most unexpected development in my healing journey came in the form of Jasmine, a landscape architect I hired to design the backyard space. What started as a professional consultation about flower beds and patio layouts evolved into coffee discussions about sustainable gardening, then dinner conversations about family dynamics. Jasmine had her own complicated history with parents who had wanted her to pursue a medical career rather than playing in the dirt, as they called her passion for landscape design. Though different from my experience, her story resonated with the theme of parental expectations versus personal fulfillment. The difference is my parents eventually came around, she explained one evening as we sat on my newly finished back deck. They saw how happy my work made me, and that became more important than their original plan for my life. Through Jasmine, I began to understand what healthy family relationships could look like: the respect for autonomy, the unconditional support through disagreements, the absence of scorekeeping or obligations disguised as love. Our relationship developed slowly, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine interest rather than need or obligation. On the one-year anniversary of the court decision, I hosted a dinner party in my now completed home. Marcus and his wife, Sarah, and her partner, two close colleagues, Jasmine and Diana, all gathered around the large farmhouse table I had built myself from reclaimed wood. As we shared food and conversation, I looked around at these people who had become my chosen family. None of them were connected to me by obligation or blood relation, except Diana, who had proven that sometimes blood can be thicker than water in the best possible way. They were here by choice, connected by bonds of mutual care and respect. After dinner, as we moved to the living room with coffee and dessert, Marcus raised his mug in a toast. To Booker, he said, who fought for what was rightfully his and in the process built something even more valuable than this beautiful house, a life entirely his own. The words touched something deep within me, a recognition of the journey I had traveled. From the overlooked child to the self-reliant student to the professional who had built his success brick by brick, just as I had renovated this house. The lawsuit had been a painful chapter, but it had also been clarifying, stripping away the last illusions about my place in my biological family and freeing me to create something more authentic. What I had learned through this entire experience was that family isn't about blood or obligation. It isn't about what you owe or what you're owed. Family consists of the people who celebrate your victories as their own, who show up when you're struggling, who value you for who you are rather than what you can provide. Looking around at these faces, friends who had become family through their actions rather than accident of birth, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for most of my life. The house that had been the center of so much conflict had become a home filled with genuine connection. The victory in court had been important, but this was the true win. Creating a life where I was valued, supported, and loved for exactly who I was. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against people who should have been in your corner? It's one of the hardest things to do, but sometimes it's necessary to protect what you've built. If my story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. Share in the comments how you've dealt with family expectations or conflicts. Your story might help someone else feeling alone in their struggle. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, the family you choose can be more powerful than the family you're born into. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.